Hello everyone, I welcome you all to the Autonomous Academy. Today we will do analysis of previous year question paper of physics named as Solid State Physics and Devices. This question paper is of year 2018. Let us see the question paper. This is the question paper. Here maximum marks are 85 and time allowed here is 3 hours. So whole question paper is divided into 3 sections, section A, section B and section C. Whereas section A is very short answer type question and this section consists of 10 marks. Each question carries here 2 marks. And you have to write your answers within 1 or 2 lines and word limit is 20. While section B is of total 25 marks. Each question carries 5 marks. In this section also there are total 5 questions. And in this question paper, questions are asked as per the units. And the last section of the question paper, that is section C. Section C is of 50 marks. Each question carries 10 marks. In this section also there are total 5 questions. As you know that this is long answer type question, so you have to answer your questions in detail. And here word limit is 800. So in this video you will get to know that how you can write your answer so that you can get maximum marks. So let us move to the answers. So guys, let's begin with very short answer type questions. So here first question is, write the Curie's law for magnetic material. Let's have answers. According to Curie's law, the magnetization in a paramagnetic material is directly proportional to the applied magnetic field. So this will be your answer. Let us move to the next question. Here next question is, explain packing density. The answer is, the ratio of total volume of atoms in a unit cell of a crystal to the volume of unit cell is called packing density. Here next question is, explain photodiode. A photodiode is a reverse biased PN junction made from the light sensitive semiconductor. Now the fourth question of section A, that is, what is an amplifier? The device used to increase the magnitude of voltage, current, power is called the amplifier. And now the last question, that is question number 5th. Write the approximate size of nanoparticles. So the answer will be, the approximate size of nanoparticles is 0.1 micrometer. Now the section B. Section B, here the question is, explain the reciprocal lattice planes. Let us see the answers. As you know that this question carries 5 marks. So there will be some lengthy portion. So let us look to the answer. Reciprocal lattice is that lattice which is obtained from the endpoints of normal drawn on different parallel lattice planes from the common origin. Each lattice point of the reciprocal lattice expresses completely the set of parallel lattice planes associated with lattice point, that is, its distance from the origin gives the lattice interval DHKL and its direction relative to the origin represents the orientation of planes. Hence, we can say that each point of reciprocal lattice is the characteristic of the associated set of parallel lattice planes. So this will be your answer, okay? Its all question is, the lattice planes of a crystal have intercepts 2a, 3b, 6c on the axis. So you have to find here the Miller indices. Let us see how we can find Miller indices. So we will take its ratio on axis, that is PA is to QB is to RC, which is equals to 2a is to 3b is to 6c. Here we will equalize it, whereas P is to Q is to R is equals to 2 is to 3 is to 6. The reciprocals of P inverse, Q inverse and R inverse are 1 by 2, 1 by 3 and 1 by 6. So we will take LCM of the denominator 2, 3, 6. We will get its inverse, that is 3 is to 2 is to 1, which is equals to HKL. So here Miller indices are 3, 2, 1. Now the third question of the short answer type questions, that is, state the postulates and limitations of Einstein theory of specific heat. So here you have to explain postulates and limitations of Einstein theory. So let us see that what we can write in postulates. So postulates, first point is, each solid is composed of large number of atoms. 1 kg atom of solid has n atoms, where n is Avogadro number. Now the second point is, in a solid, atoms vibrate on either side of their mean positions. The frequency of vibration of all atoms of a solid is same equal to nu, which is called the Einstein's frequency. And this frequency is the characteristic property of solids, and the value of nu is different for different solids. Now the third point of postulate is, that is, each atom has 3 degrees of freedom. Now the fourth point, that at absolute zero the energy of vibration of atom is 0. Fifth is, the energy of atomic oscillator is not continuous but it is discrete. The energy of an oscillator of frequency nu is an integer multiple of h nu, where h is Planck's constant. Here value is E n is equals to nh nu, where n is 0, 1, 2. And the sixth point of postulate is, the atomic oscillators are identical and distinguishable. Hence they obey the Maxwell-Boltzmann statistics. Now the limitations. Let us see that what we can write in limitation. So begin with first point. Although Einstein's theory qualitatively explains the variation of atomic specific heat of solid with temperature, particularly at low temperatures, but the value of Cv, that is specific heat, obtained theoretically does not agree with the experimental value. Now the second point, that in case of some metals like copper, iron, aluminium, the rate of variation of atomic specific heat, that is Cv, with temperature at low temperatures is more as compared to that given by Einstein's theory. Let us move to the third point. The third point is, the values of Einstein's frequency nu and Einstein's temperature are obtained empirically, that is, at any temperature to verify the experimental value and the theoretical value. The arbitrary value of nu and this are chosen which have no justification, means they cannot justify these values. Fourth point is, the assumption that all the atoms of a solid vibrate independently with the same frequency is unable to explain the actual facts. So here optional question is that you have to write short note on Bohr magneton. Okay, so let's see how we can write about Bohr magneton. The Bohr magneton is the magnitude of the magnetic dipole moment of an electron orbiting an atom with such angular momentum. According to the Bohr model, this is a ground state, that is the state of lowest possible energy. Bohr magneton is represented by mu b, which is a physical constant and the natural unit for expressing the magnetic movement of an electron caused by either its orbital or spin angular momentum. Here value of Bohr magneton is EH upon 4 pi me, where E is elementary charge, H is reduced Planck constant, m is the electron rest mass. So the value of Bohr magneton in SI unit is 9.274 into 10 to the power minus 24. Here the next question, that is question number 4. Here question is asked that what is Zener diode? Explain the working of Zener diode with its characteristic curve. Let us see the answers, that what we can write about Zener diode. So Zener diode is a PN junction diode constructed for a definite breakdown voltage. The breakdown voltage depends on doping density in P and N type semiconductors. Thus, by changing the amount of doping, Zener diode can be constructed for different breakdown voltages. The Zener diodes are generally manufactured to offer breakdown voltage ranging from 2 volt to 200 volt. Let us see the working, how it works. So the junction of a Zener diode is thin, and so a strong electric field is produced even when a low reverse bias voltage is applied. On increasing the temperature, the forbidden energy gap reduces and the Zener breakdown now begins to occur at a low voltage. At the Zener voltage, the resistance of diode abruptly falls and therefore the reverse current suddenly increases. So guys, this is the graph you can see here. This is the characteristic curve of Zener diode, which defines the working of Zener diode. Here its next question is, that is question number 5. Here the question is, the voltage gain of an amplifier without feedback is 3000. If a negative feedback is applied with feedback factor 0.01, find the voltage gain with feedback. Here the question number 5th. Okay, so here given A is equals to 3000, B is equals to minus 0.01. With feedback, AF is equals to A by 1 minus BA. So here you have to substitute the values. We will get the answer 96.8. Here its all question is, what do you mean by noise in amplifiers? What are the different kinds of noise? Answer is, the presence of unwanted disturbance in the output of an amplifier which is not related to the input signal is called noise. Noise is of two kinds, external noise, internal noise. External noise arises due to atmospheric disturbance or due to electric motors, power lines, neon signs, ignition system, etc. Internal noise is generated in the circuit elements. Internal noise is of 8 kinds. First one is thermal noise. It is produced due to random thermal motion of the charge carriers in an electrical conductor such as the resistor, etc. So it is temperature dependent. To reduce it, the operating temperature should be kept low. Second one is short noise. It arises because of random passage of charge carriers across a potential barrier, which gives rise to fluctuations in the average current, and hence it constitutes the short noise. Third one is flicker noise. This noise arises in the semiconductor devices such as transistors due to random variation in the charge diffusion process. The intensity of this noise is inversely proportional to the frequency and it becomes negligible above 1 kHz. It is absent in metals. Fourth one is partition noise. This noise arises due to regular division of current between the various electrodes. Fifth one is contact noise. It arises due to poor electric contacts or dirty terminals, etc. Sixth one is microphone noise. This noise arises due to mechanical vibrations of the parts of the circuit. Seventh one is hum. It is produced due to AC component present in the DC supply source and also due to the inter-electrode capacitance, etc. Eighth and the last one is white noise. In this noise, all frequency components are present in equal proportion. Now the sixth question, that is, explain the structure and size properties of nanomaterials. Let us see the structure. Both the bulk and nanomaterials are formed in 3 states. The structure of bulk material is crystalline and of any shape. Since its size in all 3D dimensions is bigger than nano size, so they are called the 3D materials. Nanomaterials are also crystalline, but they are of 3 kinds. First one is 0D, that is spherical, with size between 0.1 nanometer to 100 nanometer in all the 3D dimensions. Second one is 1D, that is one dimensional wire, when its 2 dimensions are of size between 0.1 nanometer to 1000 nanometer. And last, third one is 2 dimensional, that can be film or surface. It has thickness between 0.1 nanometer to 1000 nanometer. Size. The size of bulk material is more than 100 nanometer in all 3 dimensions, while the size of nanoparticles, at least in one dimension, is in range from 0.1 nanometer to 100 nanometer. The nanodot has size from 0.1 nanometer to 100 nanometer in all the 3D dimensions. Nanowire, rod or tube has size from 0.1 nanometer to 100 nanometer in 2 dimensions. And nanofilm or surface has size from 0.1 nanometer to 100 nanometer in 1 dimension. Its optional question is, what is the application of nanotechnology in the field of energy? Explain. Let us see the answer. Answer is, we know that the use of natural resources of energy such as oil, coal, natural gas, etc. is continuously increasing day by day in transportation, communication, agriculture, industry, houses and all other human jobs. As a result, they are depleting and it is a matter of great concern. Now scientists are attempting to obtain energy from some new alternative sources such as solar energy and the energy obtained from fusion of hydrogen. Although hydrogen can be obtained in abundance from the seawater, but it is very complex to store hydrogen at a very high temperature at which nuclear fusion becomes possible. By the application of nanotechnology, carbon nanotubes have been discovered which can be used for the storage of hydrogen at such a high temperature. At present, it is very costly task, but scientists are continuously making efforts to obtain carbon tubes on a large scale. Now the last section of the question paper, that is section C, and we are beginning with the question number 7a. Derive Bragg's equation 2d sin theta is equals to n lambda for diffraction of X-rays, where the symbols have their usual meanings. Its B part is show that in a cubic crystal the perpendicular distance between the two consecutive lattice plane is given as d omega is equals to a upon under root h square plus k square plus a square. So we have to consider a parallel beam of X-rays incident on a crystal in directions PA and QB, making a glancing angle theta with the crystal plane as shown in figure. This is the figure. The perpendicular distance between A and B is d. The diffracted X-rays at an angle theta dash is equals to theta from the atoms situated at A and B. This is A and this is B. The diffracted X-rays. It is clear that in the plane normal to the incident rays are and the crystal plane, the diffracted X-rays from all the atoms of a crystal plane at an angle theta dash is equals to theta. They both are in the same phase. But the intensity of diffracted rays obtained from the atoms of one crystal plane is very low. Because the penetrating power of X-ray is very high, so only a little X-ray are diffracted from the atoms of a crystal plane. Hence, it is essential that the diffracted X-rays obtained from the atoms of all consecutive crystal planes are in the same phase. So, the rays AR and BS are in the same phase. In other words, the path difference between the far difference between the rays AR and BS normals AM and AN are drawn from the point A on QB and BS. So, we can see that del is equals to MB plus BN. So from figure we will already know that theta dash is equals to theta. So from the figure we will get that MB is equals to BN, which means that if MB is AB sin theta is equals to D sin theta, obviously BN will also be D sin theta. So we can find the path difference by adding these two. So we will get 2D sin theta. For the maximum intensity, the path difference must be equal to an even multiple of lambda by 2 or an integer multiple of lambda, that is del is equals to n lambda, where already know path difference. So we will equalize this. 2d sin theta is equals to n lambda, where n is 1, 2, 3 and integer. Its B part is show that the volume of unit cell of a reciprocal lattice is inversely proportional to the volume of unit cell of direct lattice. So the primitive vectors of the reciprocal lattice are A, B, C. Okay, capital A vector, B vector and C vector. We have to find the volume of unit cell of reciprocal is equals to A vector dot B cross C vector. We know that A vector is equals to 2 pi B vector cross C vector upon A vector into B vector cross C vector. This is the value of A and this is the value of B and this is the value of C. So since volume of unit cell of reciprocal lattice, this is the formula that A vector dot B vector cross C vector. So we will substitute the values of A and B, C. We have to find the volume. So we will do the cubic 2 pi cube B vector cross C vector, and by substituting these values we will get 2 pi cube upon V. So where volume is equals to small a vector dot B vector cross C vector, which is equals to the volume of unit cell of the direct lattice. So by this we will get that volume of unit cell of a reciprocal lattice is inversely proportional to the volume. You can see from this equation that it is inversely proportional to the volume of unit cell of its direct lattice. Its OR question is, already I have told you about this, we have to find d omega is equals to a upon under root h square k square plus l square. This is the figure which shows the origin O and three mutually perpendicular, that is OX, OY and OZ, for a 3D lattice for which the Miller indices are H, K, L H, K and L, that is 3 dimensions lattice is a number of parallel lattice planes, that is HKL. Let the next plane parallel to the plane passing through O, this is the point O, A, B and C. Now the intercepts will be respectively, what will be the intercept? A by H, B by K and C by L. These are the intercepts. If the perpendicular drawn on this plane from the point O, this is the point O and you can draw the perpendicular O is ON, this is the ON. Then the separation between the two consecutive lattice plane will be ON is equals to D. So we will find the separation here. Suppose the normal ON makes an angle alpha, beta and gamma. Okay, so we will get the value that angle NOX will be alpha, angle NOY will be beta and angle NOZ will be gamma. So it is clear that we can find the value with this. D is equals to OA cos alpha, D is equals to OB cos beta and D is equals to OC cos gamma. With the help of this we will get D is equals to A by H cos alpha, which is equals to B by K cos beta, which is equals to C by L cos gamma. With the help of this we will separate it and we will get the values. So but we already know that cos square alpha plus cos square beta plus cos square gamma is equals to 1. So we will take common and we will get D square H square upon A square plus K square upon B square plus L square upon C square, which is equals to 1. By solving it we will get D is equals to 1 by H square upon A square plus K square upon B square plus L square upon C square. With this we will able to prove for the cubic crystal A is equals to B is equals to C. We will find out that since D is equals to A upon under root H square plus K square plus L square. Its our question is, how are the ionic and covalent bonds formed in solids? Give some examples of each. Let us see the answer. In ionic crystal the binding forces are of electrostatic nature, because in these crystals there is transfer of electrons from one kind of atom to other kind of atom, so that these atom may acquire the stability by completing octave of electrons in their outermost orbit. Thus the ionic is made up of positive and negative ions. These ions are so arranged that according to the Coulomb's law, the attractive forces between the unlike ions is greater than the repulsive force between the like ions. Hence, the ionic bond is due to the electrostatic force acting between the unlike ions, and it is also called heteropolar bond. Some examples are there: LiF, NaCl, CsCl. Let us talk about the covalent bonding. So in the covalent bonding, both atoms impart electrons in equal node to each other, so that each atom acquires the complete octave in its outermost orbit and gets stability. The electrons are not transferred from one atom to other atom, but they are shared equally by both the atoms. Both the atoms have equal right on the electrons so imparted, which means that both the atoms share equally these electrons and the charge density between the two is comparatively high. The covalent bonds are rigid and directional. The covalent bonds means when there is sharing of one electron pair, the covalent bond is represented by a single bond, and if there is sharing of two electron pair, it is represented by a double bond. In a bond, the spin of two electrons is opposite to each other. For example, hydrogen molecule. Now the question number 8a. My question is, what is Hall effect? Explain it. Let's see the answer. When a current carrying metallic rod is placed in an external magnetic field in direction perpendicular to the direction of flow of current, an electric field is produced in the rod in direction perpendicular to both the direction of current and the direction of magnetic field. This effect is called the Hall effect. Its B question is, define the following terms. Here first one is retentivity. So what is retentivity? Answer is the property of the ferromagnetic substance to remain magnetized even on removal of the external magnetic field. Next one is coercivity. Its answer is if the direction of magnetizing field H is reversed and its value is gradually increased, the value of I becomes 0 at the point C following the path BC. So here you can see this is the path of BC and this is the diagram. Okay. Obviously at that point C, the value of H is not 0, thus to vanish the residual magnetism of the substance, an opposite magnetizing field has to be applied. This opposite magnetizing field, due to which the residual magnetism of the substance vanishes, is called the coercive field, and this property of substance is called coercivity. Third one is hysteresis loss. In the unmagnetized state of the ferromagnetic substance, the magnetic domains form closed chains due to which the net magnetic moment of the substance is 0. When this substance is placed in an external field, the domains rotate and arrange themselves such that their magnetic moment comes in the direction of magnetic field. Here you can understand it by this, that work is done by external magnetic field in the alignment. Now on removal of external magnetic field, these domains come back and could not come back to their initial state, but submagnetism is left within the substance. Hence, same amount of energy not returned back in demagnetization. Thus, in heat hysteresis loop, there is some loss in energy. This energy loss is called hysteresis loss. Fourth one is magnetic susceptibility. The ratio of intensity of magnetization of a substance to the magnetizing field is called the magnetic susceptibility of that substance. It is represented by the letter chi, that is chi is equals to capital M upon H. Or M vector is equals to chi H vector. Obviously magnetic susceptibility chi has no unit. The magnetic induction B vector, magnetizing field H vector, and intensity of magnetization I vector are related as B vector is equals to mu naught in bracket H vector plus I vector. But we already know that B is equals to mu H vector and the value of I is equals to chi H vector. So we can equalize it. U H vector is equals to mu naught H plus chi H vector, or U is equals to mu naught 1 plus chi. Now as U is equals to mu naught mu R, since mu R is equals to 1 plus chi. So E1 is Curie temperature. The property of ferromagnetic decreases on increasing the temperature of ferromagnetic substance, and ultimately a temperature is reached when the ferromagnetic property of substance vanishes and the substance become paramagnetic. This particular temperature is called the Curie temperature of the substance. Its value is different for different substances. So these were the terms which we have to explain in long answers. Now we will move to another question, that is question number 9. Let us see the question number. Let us see the question. What do you understand by the characteristics of a transistor? Describe the method with the help of proper circuit diagram to draw the characteristic curve of a NPN or PNP transistor in the common emitter mode. Draw the characteristics curve and explain them. Let us see the answer. Transistor characteristics are the plots which represents the relationship between the current and the voltages of a transistor in a particular configuration. By considering circuits to be analogous to two-port networks, they can be analyzed using the characteristic curves, which can be of the following types. First one is input characteristics. These describe the changes in input current with the variation in the values of input voltage, keeping the output voltage constant. Next one is output characteristics. This is a plot of output current versus output voltage with constant input current. Third one is current transfer characteristics. This characteristic curve shows the variation of output current in accordance with the input current, keeping output voltage constant. The electric circuits for the NPN and PNP transistor are in CE mode, in which emitter is kept in the forward bias and collector in the reverse bias. Obviously, the base current IB and base emitter voltage VBE are in the input circuit. Hence, a graph plotted between the base current IB and the base emitter voltage VBE, keeping the collector emitter voltage VCE constant, which is called the input characteristic curve. Similarly, the collector current IC and the collector emitter voltage VCE are in the output circuit. Therefore, a graph plotted between the collector circuit IC and the collector emitter voltage VCE at a constant base current IB is called the output characteristics. Figure A and Figure B shows the electric circuit diagram for drawing the characteristic curve of NPN or PNP in CE mode. You can see it here. Input characteristics. For this, the collector emitter voltage VCE is kept constant and the base emitter voltage VB is varied with the help of rheostat RH1 and the corresponding to each voltage VBE. The corresponding base current IB is read with the help of microammeter. Then a graph is plotted for the base current IB versus the base emitter voltage VBE. The experiment is repeated for the different constant collector emitter voltage VCE. Figure represents the input characteristics. This is the input characteristics in CE mode. When VCE is equals to 0, the emitter base junction is forward bias. So the curve is like a junction diode in forward bias. As VCE increases, the width of deletion layer at the collector base junction will increase. As a consequence, the effective width of base will decrease. So the base current decreases. Further, we note that a change in VCE does not result much in deviation of the curves. The reciprocal of the slope of the curve at any point gives the input dynamic resistance of transistor at that point. Thus, input dynamic resistance RIN is equals to 1 by slope of the input characteristic curve. Or we can also write it as RIN is equals to del VBE upon del IB to the base VCE. Let us talk about output characteristics, that what we will write in exam. For this, the base current IB is kept constant at a particular value and the collector emitter voltage VCE is varied with the help of rheostat, this RH2. And corresponding to each value of VCE, the collector current IC is read with the help of milliammeter. Then a graph is plotted for the collector current IC versus the collector emitter voltage VCE. You can see the graph here. This is the graph, and this experiment is repeated for different values of base current, that is IB, and this is the output characteristic curve. From these curves, it is clear that at each base current IB, the value of collector current IC increases only up to a low value of collector emitter voltage VCE, and then with further increase in VCE, the value of IC becomes constant. The value of VCE up to which the value of IC increases with increase in VCE is called the knee voltage. The transistor is always operated at a voltage above the knee voltage. It is of the order of 1 volt. And we can also understand one thing, that above the knee voltage there is a very small increase in collector current IC with increase in collector emitter voltage VCE. The slope of this part of the curve is equal to the reciprocal of the output dynamic resistance. Thus, output dynamic resistance is equals to 1 by slope of saturated part of output characteristic curve. We can also write it as del VCE upon del IC in mod, where IB is constant. And now its second question, its sub part, that explain the meaning of rectification. Draw circuit diagram of full wave rectifier to explain its working. Obtain expression for its efficiency and ripple factor. So let us see what we will write. The process of conversion of an alternating voltage into a DC voltage is called rectification. A PN junction diode is in forward bias condition. A strong current flows through the PN junction diode due to flow of majority charge carriers. On the other hand, if the PN junction diode is in reverse bias condition, nearly negligible current flows through the junction due to minority charge carriers. Thus, if an alternating potential is applied across the ends of a PN junction diode, then in its half cycle, when the junction will be in forward bias condition, current will flow. The other half cycle, and when the junction will be in reverse bias condition, there will be no current, means no current will flow. This is a figure of full wave rectifier of PN junction diode, where D1 and D2, this is D1 and this and D2, these are the two diodes. Let us see the working. During the half cycle of input alternating potential, when the terminal A of the coil L2 of transformer is at positive potential and the terminal B is at negative potential, the P terminal of diode D1 is at positive potential and the P terminal of diode D2 is at negative potential. Hence, diode D1 is in forward bias while the diode D2 is in reverse bias. A current flows through the diode D1 and no current flows through the diode D2. In the remaining half cycle, the terminal P of the diode D1 is at negative potential and the terminal P of diode D2 is at positive potential. Hence, the diode D1 is in reverse bias while the diode D2 is in reverse bias. Okay, so it is in forward bias. As a result, now no current flows through the diode D1 while a current flows only through the diode D2. Thus, we get output potential across the load resistance RL due to flow of current in one direction over the complete cycle of input potential. It is clear from previous figure that in the complete cycle of input potential, the direction of current in load RL remains always from M to N. Thus, we get an unidirectional AC in the load. The output current so obtained can be converted into DC using the filter circuits. Let us see how we will find ripple factor. Ripple factor, with the help of definition, we already know that gamma is equals to RMS value or components for output current or voltage upon DC value of output current or voltage. So we can also write it as I to the base AC upon I to the base DC, or I to the base RMS upon I base to the DC. Now, if I RMS is the AC input, then I square RMS is equals to I square RMS plus I square DC. Then ripple factor is equals to I dash RMS upon I DC. We can also write it in roots, under root I RMS upon I DC minus 1. Then substituting these values, we will get 2 I naught upon pi, which is the value of IDC, and I RMS is equals to I naught upon root 2. Then after that, gamma is equals to I naught upon root 2 upon 2 I naught upon pi, which is in under root minus 1. Substituting the values, we will get 0.482. Now efficiency. The efficiency of full wave rectifier is, it is obtained by neta is equals to output DC power upon input DC power, which is represented by this PDC upon PAC, which is equals to 4 I naught square upon pi square RL upon I naught square by 2 in bracket R plus RL. So 8 upon pi square RL small r plus RL, which is 81.2 R upon R plus R upon RL, which is in percent. So if R is less than RL, the maximum theoretical efficiency neta max is equals to 81.2%. But for maximum output power, if small r is equals to RL, then the efficiency become 40.6%. Now question number 10. What is an oscillator? Establish the bar causing condition for an oscillator and explain the different requirement for an oscillator. So let us see the answer. An oscillator is a device by which we obtain the continuous electrical oscillations of a definite frequency. Bar causing condition. It consists of an ordinary amplifier of voltage gain A. The primary input voltage is 0 and fraction B of output voltage V2 is fed back as input. In the beginning, as the key K is pressed, the electromagnetic waves of all possible frequencies present in the atmosphere cause electrical pulses in the circuit, which are amplified by the amplifier, and we get the output voltage V2. Now, the fraction B of the output voltage V2 is fed back to the input, so that the total voltage now is BV2. This is the total voltage which is now BV2, which is again amplified, and the output voltage is A into BV2 is equals to ABV2. Again fraction B of this voltage is ABV2, it is fed back. Now the total input voltage is AB square V2, which is amplified by the amplifier to get the output voltage. AB square V2 is equals to A square B square V2. This process continues. But to obtain waves of same amplitude from an oscillator, the essential requirement is that output voltage each time must be same, which means that V2 is equals to AB V2, which is also equals to this A square B square V2, and it goes so on. AB is equals to 1, or we can also know that B is equals to 1 by A. So the here condition AB is equals to 1, this is called the Barkhausen condition. The following are the main requirements of an oscillator circuit. First one is transistor amplifier in class A condition and in common emitter mode connected with the positive feedback circuit such that its feedback ratio B is equals to 1 by A, where A is voltage gain of ordinary amplifier. It provides energy to the tank circuit for maintaining the sustained oscillations. Second one is a resonant LC or RC circuit to produce oscillations of a constant frequency. And the third one, a DC power supply in form of source of energy. Its or question is that write short notes on any two of the following. So there are four options, means questions: distortion in amplifiers, multi-stage amplifier, modulation, biasing, stabilization. So I'll go with distortion in amplifier. Let us see what we will write. An ideal amplifier is that which produces an enlarged output exactly of the same wave from as that of input signal. It must have the following three characteristics. First one is the output must contain all the frequencies which are present in the input signal. Second one, the relative phase change in all the output components must be equal. Third one, the relative amplitude of various components must be same as that of the input signal. Any deviation present in the output wave from the input waveform is called the distortion. It arises due to non-linearity of the transistor characteristics or due to the reactive components of the circuit. There can be of the following three types of distortion in an amplifier. First one is amplitude distortion. The amplitude distortion arises because of non-linearity in the current transfer characteristic of the transistor. It is therefore also called non-linear distortion. If Es is equals to E0 sin omega t, which is the input sinusoidal signal, the output contains the original frequency omega as well as the harmonics. Then the output collector current can be represented as IC is equals to I0 plus A plus A1 cos omega t plus A2 cos 2 omega t plus A3 cos 3 omega t. At the operating point IC, which is equals to I0, but from above equation IC is equals to I0 plus A from this equation. This shows that the operating point gets shifted as signal is applied, due to which distortion is introduced. Due to the presence of harmonics in the output, this distortion is also called the harmonic distortion. Next one is frequency distortion. If the input signal is of complex wave shape, it can be assumed to be equivalent to the sum of different sinusoidal wave of different frequencies. If the amplification of the different frequencies of input is not same, the output has the frequency distortion. This distortion arises due to various reactive components such as inductance, capacitance, etc. in the circuit. On account of frequency distortion, the speech or music when reproduced after amplification appears to be quite different from the original. Phase distortion. If the phase distortion, it is a difference between the different frequencies of the input, does not remain same in the output of an amplifier, phase distortion is said to exist. It arises due to various coupling reactive elements such as inductance, capacitance, which cause phase change in the output. Since the phase change produced is different for different frequencies, so the phase distortion takes place. Another one is modulation. Modulation is the process by which some properties of high frequency carrier waves are changed corresponding to the instantaneous value of low frequency audio waves. In the process of modulation, depending upon the change in amplitude, frequency or phase of the carrier wave in accordance with the instantaneous value of modulating signal, modulation is done in the three ways. First one is amplitude modulation. In this, the modulating waves are superposed with the carrier wave such that the amplitude of modulated wave is the linear function of the modulating wave. Second one is frequency modulation. In frequency modulation, the modulating waves are superposed with the carrier waves such that the frequency of carrier wave changes with the instantaneous value of modulating wave, but the amplitude and phase of modulated wave remains same as the amplitude and phase of carrier wave. Third one is phase modulation. In phase modulation, the modulating waves are superposed with the carrier waves such that the phase of the carrier wave changes with the instantaneous value of the modulating wave, but the amplitude and frequency of modulated signal remain same as the amplitude and frequency of the carrier wave. Here 11 question is, and the last question of the paper, that is, what is mean by density of states? How does the density of state changes with the energy in one dimensional, two dimensional, 3D structure? Explain. Now let us see the answer. Several properties of conductors of electricity depend on the concentration of conduction electrons present in them. The concentration of conduction electrons of an energy depends on the energy and structure of a material. Further figure shows the variation of concentration of conduction electrons with energy E for one-dimensional, two-dimensional, three-dimensional particles. The slope NE-E curve dNE upon dE is equals to dE. It is called the density of states. By knowing the density of states, the concentration of electrons in a range of energy dE is equals to E2 minus E1 can be known by the following relation. Concentration of conduction electron dNE is equals to dE into dE. This is the diagram of the density of states. The density of states dE also depends on energy E and the structure of nanoparticles. For 1D structure, density of states dE with increase in energy E. For 2D structure, the density of states dE remains unchanged by the change of energy, while for 3D structure, the density of states dE increases with increase in energy E. Figure shows the variation of density of states dE with energy E for the nanoparticles of one-dimensional, two-dimensional, three-dimensional structures. Its OR question is, describe the wet chemical method of synthesis of nanoparticles. Let us see the answer. The wet chemical methods are more useful for the synthesis of nanostructured materials. Some reasons are given below. First one is, these methods are much simple. Second one, in these methods, other external atoms can also be mixed while synthesis. Third one, these methods become possible at low temperature. Fourth one, by these methods, the nanomaterial can be obtained in a large amount. Fifth one, by these methods, the nanoparticles of different size and shape can be obtained. In these methods, the nanomaterial obtained is in liquid state, which can easily be converted either into powder or into thin film. Seventh one, that these methods are cheap and can be carried out by using less number of apparatus as compared to other methods. Generally, the nanoparticles obtained by wet chemical method is in the form of colloidal particles, which is filtered and dried to get the powder, or in some chemical methods by electrodeposit, thin film can be obtained. In a colloid, same or different substances are found simultaneously in two states, solid liquid and solid gas. Out of the two states, the size of one state is less than a micrometer. The method of synthesis of nanoparticles by colloid is very old. In 19th century, Michael Faraday synthesized the gold nanoparticles by colloid. This method can be used for synthesis of nanoparticles of all materials such as metals, semiconductors and insulators. Further, a figure shows a special kind of chemical reactor for the synthesis of nanoparticles. It is a glass flask of proper size which has previous for a thermometer, a syringe and inlet for an inert gas. A syringe is used to insert the reactants inside the flask. This is a special chemical reactor in which thermometer is given. This is a syringe to inert the reactants. This is a mixture of reactants, magnetic needle, heating plate with stirrer. This is inlet. From here gas can be inserted inside that. The chemical reactor is carried out in the inert gas medium so as to avoid the oxidation of the reactants. Generally, argon gas is used as the inert gas. There is the proper arrangement to heat the reactants and stir them well. For stirring during the reaction, a magnetic needle coated with Teflon is used. I hope this video will be helpful to you. So thanks for watching the video.